welcome back everybody. Berkley Stevens joins me today. Been a huge influence on making progress with this channel over the winter, so thanks for coming on, Berkley. Happy to have you.
It's a pleasure to finally be a guest on the Drew Dumont Show. I mean, we've kind of worked together like a lot on like this interview format that you've got going on, and it's cool to be a guest. I'm nervous, which is strange. I'm not usually nervous, but I'm nervous for this.
All right, so let's just start out with like what got you interested in the sports casting and everything.
So both my parents are engineers, and I always thought I would be an engineer. They have like a really cool niche of engineering where they design like ski lifts and zip lines, and it always seemed cool to me. And I went to UNH to do that, and then realized that even though I could kind of do it, and Greg said like a similar thing in his interview, like he started as an engineer, had like the academic tools to do it, but didn't really have like the interest. So I kind of fell out of it, and then I've always just been a sports fan. And when I used to play like street hockey with my friends, sometimes I would just like commentate the plays, or like my other buddy would just like jokingly commentate the plays. And we would do it in like a transatlantic accent, like, "Oh, Cam Comerford comes down the right." Like we would totally joke around with it. But then it kind of got to a point where like I felt comfortable just like seeing a play and calling a play. And then I had the thought when I was like 19 years old, like, people do that. I can do that. And then I started just taking it more seriously and seriously from there.
Nice. So you want to tell everybody about like your high school experience, where you went for high school and all that?
Sure. I started out freshman, sophomore year. I went to Proctor Academy in Andover, New Hampshire, which is like a prep school. My sister went there all 4 years. My sister, Callie, she's been on a mission since she was like 4 years old to be a surgeon and a smarty pants, and she's doing that, but the prep school route was not for me. I went back to Kearsarge my junior year, finished up there, obviously. And I liked it a lot better than private school personally. It's where all my friends were. I was a commuting student to private school anyway, so I wasn't getting like the boarding school experience. So that taken out of it, I was just a high schooler who wanted to be around my friends, so I went back to Kearsarge and finished up there.
Favorite parts of Kearsarge?
The baseball team, hands down, and the ski team. I was an alpine skier too. Which makes sense since my parents designed ski lifts, but definitely the baseball team. We also played like summer baseball together, so that was just the crew that I was around the most, and we were so close together, and I still keep in contact with like a lot of my old baseball teammates. You were a high school baseball player too,
yeah.
Like you get it, like that bond you get on a baseball team is different because there's going to be most of the team just waiting in the dugout, literally just hanging out while one of your buddies has their at bat. So unlike a lot of sports where you're on the field the entire time and you can't like really talk during the game to your teammates, like baseball is one of the most social sports there is, so hands down baseball.
So you were doing skiing during the winter, so what got you interested in basketball?
That's a good question. I don't want to say I'm not interested in basketball because like it really entertains me. But I tried playing when I was at Proctor, and Proctor was very bad, and some of the schools they played against, like Tilton and Brewster, just like produce NBA players. Like Nerlens Noel played at Tilton when I played at Proctor. That was my sign to stop playing basketball. Like there was no more clear sign than a 7'1" high schooler coming down the lane like, yeah, I'm not playing defense against you, dude, no way. But calling basketball, it's like one of the most entertaining things as a broadcaster because it's just nonstop. Play here, play there, play here. Like the pace is just so entertaining. And like I come from baseball where it's really slow. It's almost like storytelling most of the time, and then play-by-play a very small amount of the time. But basketball is just non-stop, highlight after highlight. It's just so fun.
And then after high school, talk about your transition to college, because I know you went to a bunch of different schools.
I did. That was my way of traveling around the state for a little bit of time. Started at UNH to be an engineer. Very similar to Greg, I made it like one semester, and then I decided like this is definitely not for me. I toughed out the next semester, just taking like gen ed so I could get ready, because I always knew like when I left UNH I was going to go back to school, even though I wasn't quite sure what the route was at that time. Like I knew I was going to go back, so just knock out gen ed that second semester. Took a gap year, worked in restaurants. I worked in restaurants a ton in my life, just waiting tables. Started as like a dishwasher. Waited tables, was a craft cocktail bartender at some fancy places. But then I got back into college. I came here, NHTI, which has continued to be pretty good to me. And then I was taking general studies courses, but focused on communication. Like there's a sports management class here that I was interested in. My baseball coach, Tom Warner, at the time actually taught it, which was nice. And then there was a sports communication class here that they still have. Professor Annie, last name escapes me, teaches it. She was always just Professor Annie to all of us, but she actually had this part in that course where everyone who was in the class had to pick, which was weird because they got to pick, but 5 minutes of a game, and then you get up in front of the class and like you stand at the podium and your game is on the projector, and then you just did play-by-play for like that 5 minutes. And that was my first time ever really doing play-by-play in front of people, but it was strange because I got to pick the game and the 5 minutes, so like I knew what plays were going to happen. Like I remember in my game, Hofstra scored, so I got to like script how I was going to say Hofstra scored this goal. When you're actually broadcasting, like you don't get the luxury of knowing what's going to happen. But that was my first experience with it, which was a really cool experience, and it made me really commit to believing that I can do this play-by-play thing. And then I transferred to Hofstra University, which is in Long Island, and they have a great radio there and sports broadcasting, broadcast journalism program. That's what I was in, and that's where I finished up school.
Did you enjoy Hofstra? I mean, what were your favorite experiences at each school?
Oh, yeah, I enjoyed Hofstra so much. I immediately joined a fraternity, which is something I thought I would never do. Like after going to UNH and seeing what Greek life was like there, where it's just these mansion frat houses all along a street, so fancy and posh, I was like, I hate Greek life. And then I went to Hofstra, and it was just like such a cool collective of guys just hanging out in this house, having a good time, and a lot of them were in broadcast journalism doing sports too, or just traditional news. And they were just so like-minded and not what I thought Greek life was at like my first impression at UNH. So Hofstra, my favorite part was the fraternity. My second semester at Hofstra, I actually became the president of that fraternity. I just loved it so much, and that was hands down my favorite experience there, other than the academic side. The academic side was pretty cool. Had a lot of resources, fancy cameras and microphones to call games. The New York Islanders were right across the street at the Berkley Center. That's awesome. NHTI, I love playing baseball here. I love just like the ability to come here, take classes, play baseball, go home. It was like very similar to high school, which a lot of people say they don't like high school, but I think it's pretty good structure, and it's the way it is because it works really well. And then at UNH, even though I knew academically it wasn't where I wanted to be or what I wanted to do, my roommate was my best friend, so it was still just like a good time in college. And he was the same way. He's now a cop, but he started out as an engineering student, and we both kind of realized at the same time, which was really comforting, that this isn't what we wanted to do when we were at like this big crossroads. So definitely just being at UNH with my best friend, running into like a huge fork in the road, and like kind of deciding that same time together that this isn't what we were going to do. I think that played a huge part, because a lot of people get to that fork in the road and it can be a really daunting and depressing thing. And it was, but luckily I had my buddy there with me.
So from going to UNH to NHTI, what made you make that decision? Because you could transfer a lot of different places.
Yeah, so there was like a gap year in between then, and NHTI was just a place to go to finish the rest of my gen eds. And since I was still on the fence, like, even though I believed I could be a broadcaster, like I wanted to not invest tens of thousands of dollars into an education if once again I got like a year through and discovered, oh, this actually isn't for me. But I came here, tuition was cheap enough, and I commuted, so I actually worked, played baseball, and my bank account grew while paying tuition, which is like unheard of when you go to college now. So NHTI was just a really easy choice to make because it was financially the smart thing to do, and it kind of took baby steps into, I don't know, what would eventually be like jumping off of a high dive.
So after graduating from Hofstra, what was your degree there?
Broadcast journalism.
All right. So then the esports piece we got to talk about, and then just getting into the workforce.
Yeah, so I graduated December of 2019, and something happened in 2020 that just ruined sports and a lot of things. I graduated with a degree in broadcast journalism, ready to commentate sports, and then COVID happened, and there were no sports. What a bummer that was. But one thing that there was esports, and I know you have like a little bit of like a mixed audience. You have some older folks that watch this. Esports is just gaming, like video games. There's a couple in particular that I commentated, which were Overwatch and Rocket League. Overwatch is like a first-person shooter game with a bunch of different characters, and then Rocket League is basically like soccer, hockey with cars. But I started commentating esports just as a hobby, and then I started coaching esports with Hood and Howard College, which are in Maryland. And then after coaching their Overwatch team for just a semester, I started calling esports for the NECC, which is the National Esports Collegiate Conference. And then that was my first paid broadcasting gig, and it got me a lot of time on the microphone, essentially calling sports, because esports operate so similar to a sport as like a play-by-play perspective. And it just got me so much mic time in like a very fast-paced thing in video games where I felt ready for the pace of whatever sport that followed that I had to commentate, whether it was football or basketball. Esports is faster. Like, it's just faster. It's a video game. It's lightning quick. So if you can commentate esports and get good at that, a sport is going to be challenging to learn, but it's so learnable from that level, kind of going down in pace.
That's an interesting perspective. What do you feel like the main differences are between esports and like real live action, like basketball or something like that?
That's a good question too. I mean, it depends on the esport. Like, Rocket League is essentially a sport in a video game. Like, you try to score a soccer ball into a goal using like your skill and your teammates. So that there's so many similarities, but in a game like Overwatch, that's like a first-person shooter kind of game where you move through like a map. You have to think like your whole team is made up of like different characters that have different strengths, much like a basketball team could be. You could have a short, fast character or player, and then you could have like a big guy who plays down low, or in Overwatch it would be like a tank that makes space for the team. So there's a lot of roles that individuals take on, and they're not all the same. Like, they're not cookie cutter. Like, you're never going to run into a high school basketball team that has 5 players on the court who are just as good at shooting threes as everyone else and just as good at like shooting a mid-ranger. Like, so you have to identify like everyone's strength, which you want to do in every game that you broadcast, because it kind of helps make stories along the way too. But aside from that, and just kind of like the makeup of a team, there's not that much similar. And how you would call an esports game is just different, because it's in all these different stages for like a basketball game. Like, the game never changes really from like how you're playing it from quarter 1 to quarter 3. It changes in a little bit like in quarter 4, but for the most part, like Overwatch, you move through a map, there's different game modes, like it changes on the fly all the time.
All right, so NHTI, how'd that come about as a job now? Because you already was here as a student.
Yeah, so I came here as a student, and then I went 4 years before coming back to work here. After COVID, I was working at the liquor stores to be an essential worker, because apparently during a huge pandemic, the government was like, you know what people need right now? They need their liquor. So
Smart.
I worked there to stay employed. They weren't going to close those down. And then my fiance, Michaela, girlfriend at the time, she was just like sending me jobs to kind of like get me closer to broadcasting games more often. And the sports information director at NHTI, which is the job that I have right now, got me close to a ton of sports, and sports that I didn't think I would always, see myself being around. Like, I didn't think I would be so closely following like a volleyball team or a girls soccer team or track and field or cross country, but it kind of exposed me to a lot of things here and made me use a lot more skills and learn more skills than just play-by-play commentary. Like, I had to really sharpen up on video editing and photography and graphic design and writing press releases, which I knew like moving forward as a broadcaster, those skills are going to help me, because you can't just go from scratch to a full-time play-by-play broadcaster. Like, there's steps in between you have to take. So I wanted to be a more well-rounded candidate for a future job, and this was a really good launching point for that.
Nice. So then you also got some other opportunities, YCN, NH Sports Page. Talk about those for a bit.
Yeah, YCN, so like I said, my fiance Michaela, she found me this job, and I came in, and she essentially like steered me this way. But then at YCN, I was just bored one day, like looking to call more games and just like fill up my schedule. So I just looked up like local sports TV, Lakes Region, New Hampshire. I just put that into Google, and then YCN came up. And I was familiar because there had been like some Sunapee games and some Kearsarge games that I saw on cable that it didn't register that was YCN, but then when I saw on their website, I was like, oh, who I used to watch like my schools play, or like where I used to watch my schools play was actually this network. So I got to their website. It did not say they were hiring or looking for anyone. I scrolled down to the bottom of the page for the contact info, and I just sent an email out into the void, hoping to hear back. And then Greg, he reached back, I think like a week later, and he was like, we're about to start football. You can come on down to this Kearsarge Campbell football game, and we'll put you on there and see how you feel. So it was literally just like, yeah, show up and, trial by fire. We'll throw you on the mic, and if you're just a liability, we'll kick you off the mic. But I showed up to that game called the YCN football game with Andrew Zerhine on September 3rd. I think that's the day that I said.
Impressive.
Yep.
That's
and
what
then, yeah, it was a great game. Kearsarge lost, which was a bummer because they're my home team. They were up, I think, like 28-3, and they lost. So I thought in my first game I was calling, like, I was building it up just like the hometown broadcaster kid who went to school at Kearsarge, like, oh, this kid is calling his home team win like his very first game ever, and then Campbell comes all the way back and just like breaks my heart, and then I had to deal with like calling a game that just like ripped my heart out and trying to stay professional. So it was a really good test of a first game, that's for sure. And Greg,
28-3.
Yep, and Greg thought I did a good job, so he kept me on.
Nice. So then Dave Haley, New Hampshire Sports Page.
Yeah, same thing. They actually did say that they were hiring on Instagram, and it got to the point where I noticed New Hampshire Sports Page like a year before I applied to be a broadcaster with them. And I had my notifications on, just kind of thinking that one day, if they were ever going to hire someone, where they would announce it would be Instagram. And that is what happened. They said that we're looking for broadcasters on their Instagram story. And I got the notification, and I emailed them within like 2 minutes of that being up. So, I mean, a lot of people, when they're looking for jobs, like, they get nervous that other people notice the opening and like kind of get their word in first. That happens. I was lucky enough to actually be the person who got their name in first. So yeah, just being diligent really got me that position. And then I remember going to golf at Canterbury Woods with my buddy Cam, and then Dave called me saying that he wanted to like try me for a game and have me shadow Pete Terrier and Lance Legier for a football game and a soccer game to see how they do it. And then they brought me on for my first soccer game. My first Sports Page game was also a Campbell game. It was Campbell's girls soccer.
And then you were on the podcast a lot this winter with Lance. I listened to some of the commentary about that, and you did a lot of the girls' basketball, stuff like that. So what was that experience like for you and just kind of moving up with Sports Page?
That was a lot of fun. Lance ran the podcast, and he was really good in just like having me on and trusting that I could talk about it, because even though it was like my second year calling girls basketball, before with YCN, we're focused on Kearsarge, Newport, Sunapee, and Sports Page is focused on the entire state, all 4 divisions. It's crazy. So Lance took the reins, and then I was kind of like the D3, D4 sort of expert. That was where I really set my sights. But I just tried to stay useful and just be someone that Lance could bounce ideas off of and opinions on certain teams. And it was nice to just like follow the state so closely. It was very busy to be on the podcast because you just have to talk to so many coaches and take such good notes and just be on the pulse of every division. It's a lot to tackle. Lance and Dave and Pete, who do like the baseball podcast, they do a really good job. But it was just a really cool opportunity to stay busy and become like an expert in, of all things, girls high school basketball in New Hampshire. But it was really cool once we got into like playoffs, and then some of the things we started talking about on like the podcast started to take shape, and you got to see coaches like become so hopeful for their teams that maybe were kind of counted out at the start of the season. So it just kind of made the entire season sort of come alive in like my own head and heart, like following it through. When before following just like 3 teams, Newport, Kearsarge, and Sunapee, it would just kind of be, I don't know, way less alive, if that makes any amount of sense.
So yeah, we got a lot of really great opportunities to talk basketball, both for NHTI, for this whole tournament that they had here, and as well for the high school stuff. I thought the high school stuff was just really, really cool because, you went to Kearsarge, I went to Hopkinton,
Yep.
Super familiar with that rivalry. We, for years and years and years, it was like we just won and won and won against Kearsarge, and then in the playoffs this year got up to us. But
yeah, it did. It sure did. I think it was it was over a decade. I think it was 12 years that Hopkinton would just beat Kearsarge.
It was like
Crazy.
the entire time I was in school, we would
Yeah.
beat them. I think it was like, for boys, it was like 2016 was the last time that Kearsarge had beat us, and we played them twice a year pretty much.
Yeah, just an insane run for Hopkinton. But Kearsarge and Noah Whipple delivered in the playoffs, and that was such a fun game to call because, like you said, I mean, it's really cool when you're doing local sports where 15 miles separate the schools. Like, you run into those other players all the time, or like parents run into other parents all the time, and like you get so much passion in just like a small pocket of the state. And then to see it blow up in like a really quality game in just a really loud playoff gym, when you're thinking about just how small these schools are, it's pretty special.
So this is why I have to be calling the YCN games next year, and you can't, because the thing is, you from Kearsarge, you called both of those Hopkinton Kearsarge games, and Kearsarge won. You also called the quarterfinal for the boys at Kearsarge, and then you called the championship for the girls at Keene. I was at both games on the bench, and you were calling both games, so I think I need to be calling the games next year for good luck.
I think you would be a great person to call those games just because you're on it in like the Lakes region sports scene, and you know like the very recent history too. And I think that pushing those storylines forward, because high school is a 4-year cycle, like you're going to know players that you're going to see for the next 2-3 years, which I think is pretty special. And even though a lot's going to change from this year to next year for both those programs, yeah, it would just be cool to have someone who's a genuine fan still calling those games.
Thank you. So we got to talk about you now, because now NHTI, we had some fun this winter. I think with just you helped me out a lot. I appreciate the help, because with the scoreboard, the lower thirds, the editing and the videos, the improvement with the reels and all that stuff, I give a lot of credit to you on that, because you helped me out a bunch with that and just getting stuff moving and being a lot more efficient. So I think that's going to help out a lot in the future, as well as I continue to get better with it. And now that it's summer, I have more free time on my hands. So appreciate that. That was pretty cool. And now we're moving on to what's coming up in the future. So, you know, you got engaged, and now you got other stuff going on. So let everybody know where you're headed, both with that and career-wise.
Yeah, I got engaged in, boy.
It's like December, November.
No. See, this is the problem, is now like that I'm wedding focused, I can remember all of the important wedding information, but like I used to know when I proposed, but I don't exactly know what day it was.
So you're telling me that you know when you called your first YCN game, but you don't know when you
all right,
proposed.
that sounds not so good. I'm pretty sure it was September 19th. Pretty sure. Not certain, but I think it was. I know like the entire story though. I mean, my proposal story actually kind of involved sports broadcasting. So NHTI, their women's basketball team this year, sadly was not that good. They've had a hard time bouncing back since COVID. There's a team in the conference who won the conference championship, Central Maine, and they're like a top nationally ranked team, and they just beat up on everyone. So I had convinced my at the time girlfriend that NHTI was playing Central Maine, and I was kind of bummed out to work it, just because when you work games that are so one-sided like that, it's just kind of a downer as someone who's always involved with sports. So the entire time I was just kind of like glum going to work this game that didn't actually exist. And then I coordinated with her older brother's fiance to take pictures of her older brother and his fiance for, that fiance's name is Brooke, for Brooke's birthday. It was all around the same time. So Michaela thought I was working, Michaela's my fiance, she thought I was working this basketball game, and she was like hired to take engagement photos of her older brother and his fiance Brooke. They were gonna do this at like this farm that I convinced Michaela, or that Brooke convinced Michaela that her family knew. This is like a total tangent, but I like my proposal story. A lot went into this. So Michaela thought I was at this basketball game, and she was at this farm taking this engagement shoot. The farm is really special to Michaela and I, and what I was really doing was like, I kind of closed down the farm for that day, but like opened up the ice cream stand, and I was hiding in the barn for like 20 minutes before they got there, and her brother and his fiance were in on it, and I got to like surprise Michaela, and we got a lot of good photos, and that was great. So I'm getting married, to answer that first part. And second part, I'm going to work at Assumption University, which is in Worcester, Mass. And that's my step up from here. It's a D2 school. They play D1 women's hockey. I'm really excited about it because there's more resources and production there. I'll get to commentate a higher quality of game. What I liked about here was it's a personal connection to NHTI, which made my job a lot of fun. At Assumption, just like that uptick in competition level, I think is going to make it a ton of fun. And they have football and hockey, which NHTI doesn't, and that's what I was looking for in that next step. So I don't remember where this answer started, but getting married and working at Assumption is where it finished.
So now I have another year left here.
Yep.
Hopefully I pass everything. And I'm able to move on after next year, but I still got another year here, and you're not going to be here. That kind of stinks.
That's okay. You have my number, and I like talking to you, so you can always reach out to me with questions.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, we've had like 3-hour conversations after
know.
games on like how to do better with all this stuff.
Yeah, and it's been, I mean, I got to give props to you too, because you're an engineering student. This is not what you do full time. Like, you are a hobbyist. You're a super passionate hobbyist, and you don't have a ton of resources, but you're so interested in actually taking criticism, which a lot of people who put themselves in front of a camera for like a hobby or to like try and make a living doing that, a lot of them can have an ego and not take criticism well. And the ones who take criticism well, like yourself, and are willing to improve, whether it's like, I know some of the first things we talked about that were basic were like doing your interviews like out of your bedroom. And like, your bedroom now looks nice because you have Drew Dumoncho stuff in there, and you've kind of made it look more like a studio, less like a bedroom. And then also just like adding things like graphics to enhance, and music, and editing together different pieces of content to release like in between interviews. I mean, you've done a really good thing with this channel, especially with the tools that you have at your disposal. It's not much, and I feel like you are pushing it about as far as you can push it, which is nice.
Appreciate
Good
it.
job.